Welcome and thank you for watching my video. My name is Ava, this is new Heirloom Kitchen, and today I will show you how to make authentic German pretzels called Brezen. I don't think that there is any other bread that is quite as famous and well loved all over the globe as the pretzel. The knotted bread is the perfect combination of fluffy, crispy, and salty. And if you have ever had the pleasure of eating a pretzel directly from a German baker, you know that nothing you can find in the US quite lives up to it. I have spent many months and many batches of dough to figure out what the tips and tricks are to guarantee you can make a pretzel that is as close to the real thing as you can get. Tip number 1. Use the right flour. Without delving too deeply into the science of flour types, just know that in Germany, pretzels are usually made from a soft wheat-derived, low gluten content, finely milled flour that is referred to as type 550 flour. In the US, most flours, like all-purpose or bread flour, are derived from hard wheat, which has a high gluten content. To get as close to the type 550 flour as possible, what you want to look for in the store is cake flour, pastry flour, or Italian tipo 00 flour. All of these are derived from soft wheat and finely milled. The low gluten content in these flours will make the dough less springy and more malleable. Tip number 2, baker's malt. This one is a game changer. Diastatic malt contains enzymes and sugars that support the development of yeast. Using a teaspoon of malt in your dough will make baked goods fluffy and light on the inside and crispy on the outside. You can find this in a well-sorted baking supply store, but I would just order it online. Tip number 3. Do not rehydrate your yeast. If you're lucky enough to find fresh yeast, you always want to use that versus dry yeast. The flavor will be better. However, dry yeast is 100% sufficient and will work perfectly fine. This recipe uses dry yeast because that's all I can get my hands on here. But if you use fresh yeast, make sure that you know that 21 grams of fresh yeast equals 7 grams of dry yeast, which is the amount that is in the small pouches you buy in the store. A lot of bakers will tell you to rehydrate the yeast in warm water before using it, but we are not going to do that for this recipe. This will make more sense later, but we want the yeast and the gluten to develop as little as possible while we work the dough. This means that the temperature of the dough needs to be kept as low as possible. Tip number 4. Work with ice-cold water. The temperature should be less than 50 degrees Fahrenheit or less than 10 degrees Celsius. The colder the better. I cannot stress the importance of this enough. Put the water in the fridge and check its temperature before you use it. If it is too warm, put ice cubes in it. Tip number 5. Use the correct lye. Sodium hydroxide or caustic soda is the chemical compound used in the lye that pretzels will be dipped into before baking. Sodium hydroxide is corrosive and you have to handle it with care. In the States, pretzels are not usually made with sodium hydroxide. However, there are exceptions. Most of the time, they are prepared by boiling them in a baking soda lye before putting them into the oven. Using this method somewhat works, but the pretzels come out not tasting right and have the wrong color and texture. We are going to use food-grade sodium hydroxide for this recipe, and I will explain in detail how to handle it later. I will list the products I use in the description below for you. And as always, I'm not affiliated with any of the companies. Make sure you review what you need carefully, and then let's start baking. Start by sifting all of the flour. Add the malt, the salt, the yeast, and the butter. Pour in the cold water. Combine everything with a hand mixer or stand mixer. Once the ingredients are loosely combined, begin kneading the dough with your hands. Remember, we want to keep the dough's temperature as low as possible, so knead quickly and don't exceed 10 to 15 minutes of kneading. The longer you'll handle the dough, the warmer it will become. Allow the dough to relax for a few minutes, but do not exceed 10 minutes of rest. Separate the dough into 90-gram pieces. Make sure you use a scale for this. You want to be as accurate as possible. If you shape the dough in advance and let it rest for a few minutes, the fibers will relax into that shape. This will make it much easier to roll them into ropes later. First, form perfectly smooth balls by folding the dough under with your thumb. Place the balls ugly side up on the counter and fold it into an oblong shape. Roll it into a 6-inch dough sausage. Place the finished piece on a board or tray that is lined with a kitchen towel. Once all of your pieces are rolled, place them all into the fridge. This will keep them cool and allow you to focus on your pretzels one at a time. Tip number 6. Keep the dough moist. Begin by rolling the dough piece into a long rope. You want your dough to be tacky so that it adheres to the surface and to your hands a little bit. If the dough is too dry, spray it with a little bit of water. I like to use a very thin silicone baking mat for this step. The thin one sticks to the countertop and it doesn't slide around. Shaping pretzels is easier said than done. Depending on the region, pretzels will look very different. For example, Swabian pretzels have big bellies and thin arms. Bavarian pretzels are the same size all the way through. It really comes down to personal preference and to your own skill level. I generally make some kind of hybrid since my parents grew up in Swabia and I grew up in Bavaria. Bakers in Germany will throw the rope up into the air and sling it into a knot to make a pretzel. They call it Brezel schlingen. And it's actually really cool to watch. I am told that when you apprentice with a baker, you will sling tens and thousands of pretzels before you even earn your degree. My skill level is nowhere near that, so I just slowly and patiently roll my dough. There are a couple of tips that I want to mention here. If you roll the dough too quickly or if it's too dry, you will cause the surface to have stretch marks that will be visible once the pretzel is baked. Take your time rolling the dough. Keeping the dough cool should have prevented gas bubbles to form, but if you encounter any, pop them by patting the dough a little. This will take some time to get better at, and as you can see, I'm by no means proficient at it. Just continue gently rolling the dough with some pressure and work section by section. I have found that picking up the rope and gently swinging it back and forth really helps with lengthening it as well. I have seen people online who do not make the rope thin enough and then end up with chunky little pretzels. While they are very cute, they won't bake right into shape, and of course they do not look like a traditional pretzel. Try to use the thickness of the dough in this video as a reference. Generally, your rope shouldn't be thicker than your finger. Also, keep in mind that we haven't allowed the dough to rise at all in between steps. This means that it will rise quite a bit in the oven. Lay the rope in an upside down U shape and cross the arms one. Make sure the ends are about the same length and cross them a second time. Hold the ends and fold them up and over onto the belly of the pretzel. You can use a drop of water on the ends to adhere them to the body. Put the pretzel onto a board or rack lined with a kitchen towel and arrange the shape. Let me show you again. Tip number 7. Allow your pretzels to cool before dipping them. Cover the pretzels with a kitchen towel and rest them in the fridge for an hour. The cool temperature and the dry air in the fridge will harden the dough and the skin will form on the outside. This will help the pretzels to keep their shape when you dip them into the lye, because it can make the dough slippery and soft, which will make it very hard to handle. I want to take a minute to address the corrosive nature of sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide can corrode skin and can damage your eyes. You should always wear gloves and safety glasses when handling it. Do not have any children or pets near you when you're handling it. Always open a window or switch on a fan. Sodium hydroxide can react with different materials, including clothing, so wear clothes that you don't care about. Only use equipment made from high-density plastics or stainless steel. If you're worried if sodium hydroxide is safe to eat, it will evaporate while baking. Pretzel lye has a 4% sodium hydroxide content. This means that for a liter of water with a mass of 1,000 grams, you will need 40 grams of pure sodium hydroxide. Add the sodium hydroxide to the water and never the other way around. Stir gently and move slowly and controlled to avoid any splashing. The water will react with the sodium hydroxide and will warm up a bit. Once the lye is clear, set up your equipment. Use stainless steel baking sheets. If you use aluminum baking sheets, they may be corroded by the lye. Line baking sheets with parchment paper or a silicone mat. Start by gently picking up a pretzel and dipping it into the lye for 5 seconds. Place it on the prepared baking sheet. Continue doing the same for all the pretzels. I would have liked to tell you of the origins and legends surrounding the pretzel, but the video was already pretty long. Maybe I can make a video about traditional German food origins at some point. Let me know what you think in the comments. Once you have finished with all of your pretzels, Dispose of the lye down the drain. Follow with plenty of hot water. I also rinse my equipment and wipe down my work surfaces before I take off my gloves. The last step before the pretzels go into the oven is the salt. Sprinkle a little bit of pretzel salt on them. You can slit the dough with a very sharp knife, like a razor blade, about 1/2 inch deep as well. Then they go into the oven on the middle rack for 12 to 15 minutes. And that's it. Fresh pretzels should be eaten within a day of baking them. Eat them with butter or with cream cheese. I really hope you will have fun with the recipe, and I hope you blow away your friends and family with these. If you try out the recipe, please send me a picture. I would absolutely love to see how your pretzels turned out. You can find my social handles as well as the recipe in the description below. If you have any suggestions for what to cook next, or if you're curious about a recipe that you would like to try, please leave me a comment below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.